My sister had been begging me to visit for months, and I kept making excuses until guilt finally won. October of 2024, a Friday evening, I loaded up my Subaru Outback with an overnight bag and a cooler full of her favorite craft beers and started the 4-hour drive from Nashville to Knoxville. I worked as a veterinary technician at a clinic near Vanderbilt, pulling long shifts that left me too exhausted for much of a social life. Most people from my graduating class had already settled into marriages and mortgages by now, but I was still renting a 1-bedroom apartment and spending my weekends catching up on sleep. That particular Friday, I left later than planned because a German Shepherd came in with a bowel obstruction and I refused to leave until he was stable. By the time I merged onto I-40 heading east, the sun had already bled out behind the hills, and the sky had turned that bruised purple color that always made me drive a little faster. I cranked up the heat and told myself I would be at Candace's place before midnight. The first hour passed without incident. I had a true crime podcast playing through my speakers, some case about a missing woman in Ohio, and I remember thinking how strange it was to find comfort in other people's tragedies. The traffic thinned out past Cookville, and soon I was one of maybe 3 cars visible in either direction. Tennessee has this way of swallowing you once you leave the cities behind. The hills roll up on both sides like shoulders hunching against the cold, and the trees press so close to the road that your headlights catch nothing but bark and shadow. I stopped at a gas station around 8:30 to fill up and grab a coffee. The attendant was a tired-looking woman with a crucifix tattoo on her wrist, and she told me to drive safe because there had been fog warnings past mile marker 80. I thanked her, topped off my tank, and pulled back onto the highway without a second thought. My mirrors showed nothing but darkness behind me, and I had no reason to think that would change. 15 minutes after leaving the gas station, I noticed headlights appearing in my rearview mirror. That alone meant nothing. Plenty of people travel I-40 at night, truckers mostly, sometimes families trying to make good time while the kids sleep. But these headlights were different. They came up fast, way too fast, and then settled about 10 feet behind my bumper. High beams, the kind that fill your entire car with white light and turn your mirrors into weapons against your own eyes. I tilted the rear view to cut the glare and squinted at my side mirrors, trying to make out the shape of the vehicle. It looked like a pickup truck, older model sitting high on its chassis. I tapped my brakes a couple times, the universal signal for back off, but the truck did not slow down. If anything, it crept closer. I could feel the heat of those headlights on the back of my neck like a physical pressure, and I told myself this was just some impatient local who wanted me to speed up or move over. I was doing 70 in a 65 zone, which should have been more than enough for anyone. The right lane was empty, completely open, and yet this truck refused to pass. It just sat there inches from my rear bumper, those high beams drilling into my skull. I sped up to 75, then 80, watching my speedometer climb while the truck matched me perfectly. My heart started beating a little harder. I checked my phone and saw 1 bar of signal, barely enough to load a text message. The next exit was 14 miles away according to the last sign I remembered passing. I moved into the right lane, slowing down deliberately, giving the truck every opportunity to blow past me and disappear into the night. Instead, it moved into the right lane behind me. Same distance, same blinding light. That was when the first real spike of fear hit my chest, because I understood that whoever was driving that truck was not trying to pass me. They were following me. I grabbed my phone and tried to dial 911, but the call would not connect. The screen just showed that spinning wheel, searching for a signal that did not exist out here in the gaps between cell towers. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles tight, mind racing through options. The highway stretched ahead in a long straight line with no exits, no gas stations, nothing but guardrails and trees and the occasional mile marker reflecting my headlights back at me. Then the truck accelerated. I watched it swing into the left lane, engine roaring loud enough that I could hear it over my own car. And for one hopeful second, I thought the driver had finally gotten bored and decided to pass. But the truck did not pass, It pulled up alongside me, matching my speed exactly, and then it started drifting toward my lane. Not fast, slow and deliberate, like a predator testing how its prey would react. I jerked the wheel right and heard my tires bite into the rumble strip along the shoulder, that violent vibration shaking through the frame of my car. The truck pulled back into the left lane and I steadied myself, breathing hard, trying to keep my car centered. My side mirror caught a glimpse of the driver for just a moment when we passed beneath an overhead light. Male, broad shoulders, baseball cap pulled low. I could not see his face, just the shape of him hunched forward over his steering wheel. The truck dropped back behind me again, resuming its position inches from my bumper, and I realized he was playing with me, testing my reactions, seeing how I would respond to pressure. I had dealt with aggressive drivers before, road rage incidents where someone cuts you off and screams obscenities through their window. But this was different. There was no anger here, no honking, no middle fingers. Just that truck sitting in my mirrors like a patient animal waiting for its moment. I pressed the gas and pushed my Subaru up to 85, watching the speedometer needle climb into territory I had never driven before on a dark highway. The truck matched me. 90, the truck matched me. I was running out of speed and running out of ideas. A sign appeared in my headlights announcing an exit in 2 miles, some town I had never heard of called Granton. I made a split-second decision and stayed in the right lane, watching the exit approach, waiting until the last possible moment before yanking my wheel toward the off-ramp. My tires screamed against the asphalt as I took the curve too fast, and I felt my car tilt dangerously, the passenger side lifting just slightly before slamming back down. In my rearview mirror, I saw the truck blow past the exit, its brake lights flaring red in the darkness as it tried to slow down. A surge of relief flooded through me. I had lost him. I had actually lost him. The off-ramp deposited me onto a 2-lane state highway surrounded by farmland and scattered houses with their porch lights glowing in the distance. I pulled into the parking lot of a closed feed store and killed my headlights, sitting there in the dark with my engine running, trying to catch my breath. My entire body was trembling. I picked up my phone and saw 2 bars now, enough to make a call, and I was about to dial 911 when headlights appeared at the top of the off-ramp. The truck had circled back. I do not know how. Maybe there was a turnaround somewhere on the interstate, or maybe he drove the wrong way down the shoulder. It did not matter. What mattered was that those headlights were coming down the ramp, moving slow, scanning the road like searchlights. I threw my car into drive and pulled out of the parking lot without turning on my headlights, using the faint glow of the moon to navigate. The state highway curved through fields and past old barns, and I drove as fast as I dared in near total darkness, checking my mirrors every few seconds. The truck's headlights appeared behind me about 30 seconds later. He had seen me. He knew which way I had gone, and then he did something that nearly made me veer off the road entirely. He turned off his headlights too. Now we were both driving blind, 2 dark shapes hurtling through the Tennessee night, and I understood with horrible clarity what he was trying to do. He wanted me to lose track of him. He wanted to come up beside me without warning, to run me off the road when I could not see him coming. I was not just being followed anymore. I was being hunted. I turned my headlights back on because I had no choice. The road ahead curved sharply and I could not navigate it blind. Not at this speed. Not with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The moment my lights came on, I saw the truck in my side mirror. It had crept up into my blind spot, maybe 15 feet behind me and to the left, completely invisible until that second. If I had tried to change lanes, he would have clipped me. If I had slowed down, he would have been on top of me. I screamed, actually screamed out loud in my car, and punched the accelerator. The Subaru lurched forward and I took the curve way too fast, feeling my back end swing loose on the gravel shoulder before the tires caught again. The truck fell back slightly, but only slightly. I could see his outline now in my rear view, that dark shape against the darker sky, pacing me like a wolf running alongside a wounded deer. A mailbox flashed past on my right, then another, and I realized I was passing through some kind of rural neighborhood. Houses sat back from the road behind long driveways, their windows dark, their occupants asleep and oblivious to the nightmare unfolding on the road in front of their homes. I thought about pulling into one of those driveways, laying on my horn, begging someone to help me. But I knew that would mean stopping, and stopping meant giving him exactly what he wanted. If I got out of my car, I was dead. I knew that with a certainty that felt like ice in my veins. So I kept driving, scanning the road ahead for any sign of civilization, any gas station or police station or anywhere with people and lights and witnesses. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat and I grabbed it without looking, hitting the speaker button. It was Candace, calling to ask where I was. I started talking before she could finish her sentence, words tumbling out in a rush, telling her someone was following me. Someone was trying to run me off the road. I did not know where I was. I needed help. I needed the police. She went quiet for a second and then her voice came back sharp and focused. She told me to stay on the line. She was calling 911 from her landline right now. Just keep driving. Just keep talking to her. Tell her every road sign I passed. I had never loved my sister more than I did in that moment. I read off every sign I could see. County Road 114. A mile marker with a number I could barely make out. A faded billboard advertising a church revival from 3 years ago. Candace repeated everything back to me, relaying it to the 911 dispatcher on her other phone. The truck stayed behind me, close but not closing the gap, like he was waiting for something. Then I saw lights ahead. Not headlights, but fixed lights, the kind that meant a building, a business, something other than empty farmland. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a large structure with a parking lot, and my heart nearly burst with relief when I recognized what it was. A way station for commercial trucks, the kind with a small office building and those bright fluorescent lights that stay on all night. There was a semi parked in the lot, its cab dark, but its presence meaning someone was probably sleeping inside. I pulled into that parking lot going 60 miles an hour and slammed on my brakes so hard the seatbelt cut into my chest. I threw open my door and ran toward the office building screaming for help, not caring how crazy I looked, just needing to get inside, needing walls between me and whoever was in that truck. The truck had followed me into the parking lot. I heard its engine behind me, heard the crunch of gravel under its tires, and then I heard something else. Sirens. Distant but getting closer. That beautiful wailing sound cutting through the night air. The truck stopped. I turned around, standing in the pool of light outside the way station office, and I watched the driver. I still could not see his face, just that silhouette behind the windshield, that shape that had been hunting me for the last 20 minutes. He sat there for maybe 5 seconds, engine idling, and I knew he was looking at me. I could feel his eyes even if I could not see them. Then he threw the truck into reverse, backed out of the parking lot, and disappeared down the road in the opposite direction. The semi-driver had woken up and was climbing out of his cab, asking me what was wrong, and I just collapsed against the wall of the office building and started crying. The police arrived about 4 minutes later. They found me still sitting there, shaking, trying to explain what had happened while Candace stayed on the phone with me the entire time. They never caught him. I gave the officers everything I could remember. Dark pickup truck, older model, maybe a Ford or a Chevy from the late 90s. Male driver, large build, baseball cap. No license plate because I never got a clear look at it in the dark. They put out a bulletin, searched the surrounding roads, checked traffic cameras at the interstate exits, but the truck had vanished like it had never existed. A detective called me 2 weeks later and told me they had found 3 other reports from women who described similar incidents on that same stretch of I-40 over the past year. Same tactics, high beams, tailgating, trying to force them off the road. None of them got a plate either. None of them could identify the driver. He was still out there, the detective said, and all they could do was increase patrols and hope someone eventually got lucky enough to catch him in the act. That word stuck with me. Lucky. Like surviving was just a matter of chance. I still drive to Knoxville to see Candace, but I never take that route anymore. I add an extra hour to my trip by going through Chattanooga instead, and I always leave in the morning when the sun is high and the roads are full of other cars. Sometimes at night, when I am driving home from work and headlights appear in my rearview mirror, I feel my chest tighten and my grip on the wheel go white. It only lasts a second before I remind myself that I am safe, that I am in the city, that not every set of headlights belongs to him, but some part of me knows that I will never fully stop checking my mirrors. Some part of me is still on that dark road in Tennessee, still running, still waiting for the moment when those high beams reappear and the hunt begins again. I think about the other women sometimes, the ones who reported similar encounters, and I wonder how many more there are who never said anything at all. I wonder if any of them were not as fortunate as me. And I wonder, every single time I get behind the wheel after dark, if tonight is the night he finds someone else. Irrigation equipment sales might sound boring, but the job takes you places most people never see. My territory covers the rural stretches of Missouri, Arkansas, and parts of Oklahoma. Farming country where the nearest Walmart can be 40 miles away, and cell towers are more of a suggestion than a guarantee. I graduated from a small college in Kansas back in 2015, and 8 years later, I had worked my way up to regional accounts manager, which really just meant I spent more time on the road than at home. That particular Wednesday in late March 2023, I had finished my last meeting of the week in a town called Pocahontas, Arkansas, a sleepy little place with one stoplight and a diner that served the best chicken fried steak I have ever tasted. My GPS showed 2 routes back to my motel in Jonesboro, the main highway, which would take an hour and 40 minutes, or a series of county roads cutting through farming corridors that promised to shave off almost 40 minutes. I was tired. My back ached from 3 nights on cheap motel mattresses, and all I wanted was a hot shower and a cold beer. The shortcut seemed like the obvious choice. I pointed my rental car, a white Chevy Malibu that smelled like someone had chain-smoked in it for a decade, toward the setting sun, and headed into the emptiest stretch of land I had seen in years. The first half hour was peaceful in a way that city people never really understand. Fields rolled out in every direction, brown and gray with early spring stubble, waiting for the planting season to bring them back to life. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass without one of them drifting onto the gravel shoulder, and the asphalt was cracked and patched in a dozen places. I passed maybe 3 farmhouses total, all of them set far back from the road with long dirt driveways and rusted mailboxes leaning at odd angles. No other vehicles, not a single one. The sun kept dropping, turning the sky into bands of orange and purple, and I cracked my window to let in some of the cool evening air because the heater in the Malibu was broken on full blast. My phone had lost signal about 15 minutes after I left Pocahontas, and the radio was nothing but static, so I drove in silence. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crow lifting off from a fence post as I passed. I remember thinking how isolated it felt, how far removed from anything resembling civilization. At the time, it seemed almost meditative, calming. I had no idea that someone was watching me drive deeper into that emptiness, counting the minutes until I reached their trap. I saw the first branch about 40 minutes into the drive. It was a thick limb, maybe 8 inches in diameter and about 12 feet long, lying diagonally across the road. The bark was still pale where it had broken from the tree, and a few green buds clung to the smaller twigs. It looked fresh, like it had fallen within the last day or 2. We had gotten some strong winds earlier that week, so it did not strike me as unusual. I slowed the Malibu to a crawl and studied the obstacle. There was just enough room on the right shoulder, where the asphalt gave way to packed dirt and gravel, to squeeze around it without going into the shallow drainage ditch beyond. I eased the car over, felt the tires crunch on loose stones, and passed the branch without any trouble. As I pulled back onto the road and accelerated, I glanced in my rearview mirror almost out of habit. The branch sat there in the fading light, a dark shape against the gray pavement getting smaller as I drove away. I thought about stopping to move it out of the road. Some farmer with a trailer might not see it in time, but I was tired, and the daylight was fading fast. I told myself someone local would deal with it. I kept driving. That decision, that small act of laziness, might be the only reason I am still alive to write this. Maybe 3 or 4 minutes passed. I had just crested a small rise in the road, one of the few elevation changes in that pancake-flat landscape, when something made me look in the rearview mirror again. I cannot explain why. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, call it whatever you want. But I looked, and what I saw turned my entire body cold. 2 figures stood in the road behind me, right where the branch had been. They were maybe 300 yards back, but I could see them clearly enough in the last light of the sunset. 2 men, both wearing dark clothing, and they were dragging something across the asphalt. It took me a second to process what I was seeing, and then it clicked. They were pulling the branch back into place, not to the side of the road, across it, blocking it completely. I watched them position it, watched them step back to examine their work, and then both of them turned and looked in my direction. I do not know if they could see me watching them in my mirror, but it felt like they could. It felt like they knew exactly where I was and exactly what I was doing. My foot pressed down on the gas pedal without any conscious decision from my brain, and the Malibu surged forward. The speedometer climbed from 40 to 50 to 60. I needed to get out of there. I needed to find a main road, another car, a farmhouse with lights on. Anything. The GPS on my phone was useless without signal, but before I had lost connection, it had shown this road continuing straight for another 6 or 7 miles before intersecting with a larger county route. 6 miles. At 60 miles per hour, that was 6 minutes. I could do 6 minutes. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached, and kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, scanning for any sign of civilization, any indication that I was getting closer to safety. The fields blurred past on either side, darker now as the sun slipped below the horizon, and the Malibu's headlights clicked on automatically, cutting 2 pale beams through the gathering dusk. I kept checking the rearview mirror, but the road behind me was empty, just fading gray asphalt disappearing into shadow. The 2 men were gone, or at least too far back to see. For about 90 seconds, I let myself believe that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they were just local guys clearing debris from the road. Maybe they had put the branch back to mark a hazard until they could return with a chainsaw. My brain scrambled for any explanation that did not involve what my gut already knew was true. And then I came around a gentle curve and saw it, and every desperate rationalization died in my throat. Another branch. No, not a branch. A tree. An entire oak tree, not huge but substantial, maybe 30 feet long, with a trunk as thick as a telephone pole, lying directly across the road. Both ends stretched into the drainage ditches on either side, leaving no gap, no shoulder to squeeze through. Nothing. I slammed on the brakes and the Malibu skidded, the tires screaming against the asphalt, and I came to a stop maybe 20 feet from the barrier. My headlights illuminated the trunk in a harsh detail, the raw, pale wood where it had been cut, not broken, cut with a chainsaw, the teeth marks still visible in the flesh of the tree. This was not storm damage. This was not an accident. Someone had felled this tree and dragged it into the road, positioned it carefully to make sure no vehicle could pass. I sat there, engine idling, staring at that barricade, and my mind raced through options that all led nowhere. I could not drive around it. I could not drive through it, and I could not go back, because somewhere behind me 2 men had sealed the road and were probably already walking in my direction. I was boxed in, trapped on a strip of crumbling asphalt in the middle of nowhere, with night falling fast and no way to call for help. That is when they appeared. Not from behind me, where I expected them, but from the sides. From the tree lines that bordered the fields on either side of the road, maybe 50 yards back from the asphalt. First one silhouette on the left, stepping out from between 2 gnarled oaks, then another on the right, emerging from a cluster of brush. Then 2 more, one on each side, spaced apart like they had rehearsed this. I counted 5 in total before I stopped counting, because my brain was no longer processing information in any useful way. They walked slowly, deliberately, not running, not shouting, just moving toward the road with the calm patience of people who knew their prey had nowhere to go. The last of the daylight was almost gone, but I could make out enough details to know these were not teenagers playing a prank. They were grown men, most of them heavy-set, wearing work clothes, canvas jackets, boots, jeans stained with dirt or oil, and they were carrying things, long things. One of them had what looked like a pipe or a metal rod. Another held something with a wooden handle, an axe or a sledgehammer, I could not tell. A third had a length of chain wrapped around his fist, the excess dangling at his side. These were not tools for clearing brush. These were weapons. And they were walking toward me like they had all the time in the world. I had maybe 30 seconds before they reached the road. My mind finally kicked into gear, running through every possible option at a speed that felt almost detached from my body. I could get out and run into the fields, but they knew this land, and I did not. And I would be running blind in the dark while they closed in from multiple directions. I could stay in the car and lock the doors, but a sledgehammer or an axe would go through a window in seconds, and then I would be trapped in a metal box with no way to defend myself. I could try to ram the tree blocking the road, but it was solid oak and the Malibu was a mid-size sedan. At best, I would destroy the front end of the car and disable my only means of escape. None of the options were good. All of them ended with me dead or worse on this empty stretch of road where no one would find me for days. But then I looked at the tree again, really looked at it, and I noticed something. The trunk was thick, yes, but the branches extending from it were not. On the far right side, where the tree's crown had fallen into the ditch, the limbs were thinner, some of them no thicker than my arm. And beyond them, on the other side of the ditch, was an open field. Flat, bare, recently plowed. If I could get enough speed, if I could hit that section at the right angle, maybe, just maybe, I could smash through the smaller branches and make it into that field. I did not give myself time to second guess. The men were maybe 40 yards away now, close enough that I could hear one of them shout something to the others. A harsh, guttural sound that I could not make out, but that sounded like a command. I threw the Malibu into reverse and floored the accelerator. The tires spun, caught, and the car lurched backward. I covered maybe 50 feet before I slammed the brakes, yanked the wheel hard to the right, and shifted into drive. The engine roared as I pressed the gas pedal to the floor. The speedometer climbed, 20, 30, 40, and I aimed the car at the far right edge of the fallen tree, where the branches were thinnest, where the ditch was shallowest, where I had the best chance of breaking through. The headlights bounced wildly as the car hit the gravel shoulder, then the slope of the ditch, and for a terrible second the whole vehicle tilted like it might roll. But the wheels found traction in the soft earth, and the Malibu plowed forward, smashing into the tangle of branches with a sound like 100 bones snapping at once. Wood exploded across the hood and windshield. Something cracked against the side mirror and tore it clean off. I felt the car buck and shudder as it climbed over debris, felt the undercarriage scrape against something solid, and then, impossibly, miraculously, I was through. The field opened up in front of me, dark and endless under the first stars of the evening. The ground was soft from recent plowing, and the Malibu's tires sank a few inches into the loose soil, but the car kept moving. I did not slow down. I did not look back. I just drove, bouncing across the furrows at 30 miles an hour, the steering wheel jerking in my grip as I fought to keep the car pointed in a straight line. Behind me, I could hear shouting, angry, frustrated voices carrying across the empty field, but they were getting fainter with every second. No headlights followed me, no engines roared to life. They had not expected me to do this. They had planned for someone who would stop, who would panic, who would make the mistake of getting out of the car or trying to reason with them. They had not planned for someone desperate enough to destroy a rental car to escape. I drove for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 or 6 minutes, crossing field after field, crashing through a low barbed wire fence at one point, until finally, I saw lights in the distance. A farmhouse. A real one, with a porch light on and trucks in the driveway. I aimed the battered Malibu toward it and did not stop until I was parked right in front of the steps, laying on the horn with everything I had. An older man came out first, maybe 60 years old, wearing suspenders over a flannel shirt and holding a shotgun like he knew how to use it. His wife appeared behind him a moment later, already on a cordless phone. I must have looked insane. A stranger in a destroyed car, covered in sweat, babbling about men with weapons and trees across the road. But something in my face or my voice must have convinced them, because the man kept his gun ready while his wife called the county sheriff. I sat on their porch steps, shaking so hard I could barely hold the glass of water they gave me, and waited for the sirens. It took almost 40 minutes for the deputies to arrive, and another hour for them to check out the road I had described. When they came back, their faces told me everything I needed to know before they said a word. The tree was gone. The branch was gone. There was no sign that anything had blocked that road at all. Just some tire tracks in the dirt shoulder and a few broken twigs scattered across the asphalt. No men, no weapons, no evidence that any of it had happened. One of the deputies, a younger guy with a buzz cut and skeptical eyes, asked me 3 times if I had been drinking. I had not. I had not taken any drugs. I was not hallucinating, but I could see in their faces that they did not believe me. They took my statement, gave me a ride back to my motel in Jonesboro, and told me to call if I remembered anything else. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my motel room with the chain on the door and a chair wedged under the handle, staring at the ceiling and replaying every second of what had happened. The next morning, I returned the destroyed Malibu to the rental company and paid the damage fees without complaint. It was worth every penny. I called my boss and told him I was taking a few personal days. Then I drove home to Kansas, taking only major highways the entire way, and I did not stop for anything except gas at well-lit stations with plenty of other cars around. In the weeks that followed, I did some research. I found a few scattered reports online, Reddit threads, local news archives, true crime forums, about similar incidents in rural areas across the South and Midwest. Fake accidents, staged breakdowns, trees or debris blocking isolated roads. Most of the stories ended with the victim escaping, like me, but a few ended with people simply disappearing, cars found abandoned, missing persons reports that went nowhere. The common thread in all of them was isolation. These people, whoever they were, targeted travelers on back roads, people who would not be missed right away, people whose disappearance could be written off as an accident or a runaway. I never found out who the men on that road were. I never found out what they wanted from me, and part of me hopes I never do. Arizona heat has a way of clinging to your skin even after the sun disappears. And that September night in 2022 was no exception. My name is Carolyn, and I had just turned 34 2 weeks before accepting a job offer that would change everything. Phoenix seemed like the fresh start I needed after spending my entire adult life in El Paso. Same apartment, same dead-end office job, same faces at the grocery store who still remembered me as the quiet girl from high school. A friend from college had connected me with a position at a marketing firm downtown, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to hope. So I packed everything I owned into my old Subaru Outback and decided to drive through the night, because sleeping in motels alone made me more anxious than exhaustion ever could. The plan was simple: 8 hours on the road, arrive by sunrise, begin a new chapter. I had made this drive once before during daylight, and it felt manageable enough. What I did not account for was how different the desert becomes when darkness swallows every familiar landmark, and the highway stretches into an endless black ribbon ahead. By midnight, I had passed Tucson, and was somewhere between Picacho and Casa Grande, though the specifics blurred together after hours of nothing but headlights, cutting through emptiness. The radio had given up on me about 40 miles back, cycling through static and fragments of Spanish stations that faded in and out like whispers. I remember glancing at my phone, no signal, not even a single bar, and thinking how isolated this stretch of road truly was. There were no streetlights out here, no billboards, no signs of civilization beyond the occasional reflective mile marker that flashed green in my headlights. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, and I was running on adrenaline and the promise of a bed waiting for me in Phoenix. That was when I noticed the temperature gauge on my dashboard creeping upward, the little needle inching toward the red zone with a slowness that felt almost deliberate. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a sensor glitch from the old car acting up, but deep down I knew that needle had never lied to me before. Within minutes, the needle was buried in the red, and a thin wisp of steam began curling up from beneath the hood. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and started looking for somewhere to pull over. But there was nothing, just flat desert on both sides, scrub brush and darkness stretching toward mountains I could not see. The steam grew thicker, flooding across the windshield until I could barely make out the road in front of me. I had no choice. I eased onto the narrow shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires as the car rolled to a stop. When I turned off the engine, the silence hit me like a wall. No crickets, no wind, nothing but the ticking of hot metal and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, trying to process how completely alone I was. My phone was useless. The nearest town was at least 30 miles in either direction, and I knew absolutely nothing about car engines beyond where to put the gas. I popped the hood release but stayed inside, remembering something my father told me years ago about letting an overheated engine cool down before touching anything. The dashboard clock read 12:47. I figured I would give it 20 minutes, maybe 30, and then check the coolant reservoir and hope for the best. Outside my windows there was nothing but black, the kind of darkness that city people never truly experience, where the sky and the land merge into one indistinguishable void. I leaned my head back against the seat and tried to steady my breathing, telling myself this was just a minor inconvenience, that cars overheat all the time, and I would be back on the road soon enough. That was when I saw headlights appear in my rearview mirror, small at first, growing larger as a vehicle approached from the direction I had come. Relief washed through me for exactly 3 seconds before the headlights went dark. The vehicle was still coming. I could hear the engine now, a low rumble growing closer, but whoever was driving had turned off their lights completely. My first instinct was to start my car and drive, overheated engine or not, but my hands would not cooperate. I watched in the side mirror as the shape materialized out of the darkness. An old pickup truck, maybe from the 80s, with a dull paint job that seemed to absorb what little moonlight there was. It pulled up about 20 feet behind me and stopped. The engine cut off. For a long moment nothing happened, and I sat there barely breathing, telling myself it was probably just someone checking if I needed help. A good Samaritan who turned off his lights because why? I could not think of a single reasonable explanation. Then the driver door opened with a metallic creak that echoed across the empty desert, and a man stepped out. He was tall and lean, wearing dark jeans and a work jacket despite the lingering heat. I could not see his face clearly, just the outline of him standing there, watching my car. His hands hung at his sides but slightly behind his hips, like he was holding something or hiding something. I could not tell which. He started walking toward me with slow, deliberate steps, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to do something. I hit the lock button, even though I was almost certain the doors were already locked, and the click seemed impossibly loud in the silence. The man stopped about 5 feet from my window. He tilted his head to one side, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, almost friendly, like we were neighbors chatting over a fence. "Carolyn," he said. Just my name. Nothing else. I felt the air leave my lungs. I had not told anyone my name on this trip. I had not stopped anywhere except a gas station outside of Tucson where I paid at the pump and never spoke to a soul. My luggage was in the trunk, out of sight, with no visible tags. There was no possible way this stranger on a pitch-black road in the middle of nowhere could know my name, and yet he had said it like he had known me my whole life. I did not respond. I could not. My throat had closed up, and my mind was racing through every true crime podcast I had ever listened to, every news story about women who vanished on empty highways and were found weeks later in shallow graves. The man took another step closer and leaned down slightly, bringing his face near the window. In the faint glow of my dashboard lights, I could finally see him. Weathered skin, maybe mid-50s, with deep-set eyes that caught the light in a way that made them look almost colorless. He had a scar running from his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone, old and faded, and his lips were cracked from the dry desert air. "Engine trouble," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I can get it going again for you. Just pop the hood and step out for a minute." His voice remained pleasant, conversational, as if he were offering to help a friend change a flat tire. But his eyes never blinked, not once, and they stayed fixed on my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I shook my head, and finally found my voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. "I already called for help," I lied. "Someone is on their way." The man smiled at that, a slow spreading of his lips that revealed teeth too white for his worn face. "No signal out here," he said, tapping his own chest pocket where presumably a phone sat. "Checked myself about 10 miles back. Nothing until you hit Casa Grande." He knew. He knew I was lying, and he knew I was trapped, and the way he said it, matter of fact, almost gentle, was worse than if he had screamed at me. I gripped my phone anyway, holding it up as if it were some kind of shield, and he just watched me with that patient expression. Then he began circling my car, moving around the front toward the passenger side with those same unhurried steps. I heard his fingers drag along the hood as he walked, a soft scraping sound that seemed impossibly loud. When he reached the passenger window, he stopped and tapped on the glass 3 times with his knuckle. Tap, 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 like a polite visitor waiting to be let in. "Carolyn," he said again through the glass, "you should not be out here alone. Bad things happen to women on roads like this." I wanted to scream, but there was no one to hear me. I wanted to drive, but my engine was dead. All I could do was sit there, paralyzed, as this man who somehow knew my name continued his slow orbit around my vehicle. He moved to the back now, and I twisted in my seat to keep him in sight, watching as he paused by the trunk and ran his hand along the metal like he was petting an animal. "Nice car," he called out, his voice slightly muffled. "Subaru, reliable, except when they overheat, of course." He laughed softly at his own observation, and the sound of it made something twist in my stomach. I thought about the pepper spray buried somewhere in my purse on the passenger seat, but the idea of taking my eyes off him long enough to dig for it seemed impossible. He completed his circle and returned to my driver's side door, standing so close now that I could see the stitching on his jacket. Without warning, he grabbed the door handle and yanked, hard. The whole car shook, but the lock held, and I heard myself let out a small cry that sounded pathetic even to my own ears. He did not seem frustrated by the locked door. If anything, he seemed amused. He leaned in close then, pressing his face near the narrow gap at the top of the window frame, where the seal had worn away over the years. His breath fogged against the glass, and I could smell him. Cigarettes, motor oil, something sour underneath. "I knew you would break down here eventually," he whispered through that tiny crack, and his voice was so close it felt like he was inside the car with me. "Been waiting a long time for this stretch. Knew you would come through." My mind struggled to make sense of his words. Waiting? How could he have been waiting for me specifically? I had only decided to take this route 3 days ago. I had not told anyone except my friend in Phoenix, and even then only through a text message. The impossibility of it crashed against my terror, and for one wild moment I wondered if I was dreaming, if I had fallen asleep at the wheel and this was some kind of nightmare my exhausted brain had conjured. But the smell of him was too real, the sound of his breathing too close, and when he tapped on the glass again, I flinched so hard I bit my tongue. That was when I saw them, headlights in the distance, coming from the direction of Phoenix. 2 bright points of light growing steadily larger on the dark highway. The man saw them too. He straightened up slowly and turned to look, his body going rigid as he calculated something in his head. For a moment he just stood there, silhouetted against the approaching glow, and I held my breath waiting to see what he would do. The headlights kept coming closer now, close enough that I could hear the faint hum of another engine cutting through the desert silence. The man looked back at me one last time, and in the growing light I saw his face clearly for the first time. Those pale eyes, that scar, an expression that was not anger or frustration, but something closer to disappointment, like a child whose game had been interrupted. "Another time, Carolyn," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked back to his truck with the same unhurried pace he had used before, as if he had all the time in the world. He climbed inside, started the engine, and pulled away without turning on his headlights, disappearing into the darkness ahead like he had never been there at all. The other car, a minivan with a family of 4 heading home from a camping trip, stopped when they saw me on the shoulder with my hood up. A man named Douglas and his wife Renee helped me add coolant from a jug they kept for emergencies, and their 2 kids watched from the back seat with sleepy curiosity. I must have looked like a wreck because Renee kept asking if I was okay, if something had happened, and I did not know how to explain that a stranger had just circled my car calling me by a name he should never have known. They followed me all the way to Casa Grande and waited while I pulled into a gas station with bright lights and security cameras and people. I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours, shaking, calling my friend in Phoenix and then the police. The officers who came took my statement but seemed skeptical. No crime had technically been committed, they said, and without a license plate or better description, there was not much they could do. I never made it to Phoenix that night. I got a motel room in Casa Grande and lay awake until sunrise, watching the door and jumping at every sound in the hallway. It took me 3 weeks to figure out how he knew my name, and the answer made everything worse. I had stopped at that same gas station outside Tucson dozens of times over the years during visits to Phoenix, always paying at the pump, always thinking I was anonymous. But there was a rewards card linked to my credit card, one I had signed up for years ago and forgotten about, and every transaction printed my full name on their system. A friend who worked in retail told me that anyone with access to the register could see customer names attached to pump purchases. I do not know if that man worked there, or knew someone who did, or had some other way of tracking vehicles that passed through. I do not know how he knew my car would overheat on that specific stretch of road. Maybe he had followed me before and noticed the steam. Maybe he had even done something to cause it during one of my earlier stops. The possibilities spiraled in my head for months until I had to force myself to stop thinking about it or go insane. I live in Phoenix now, and I have not driven through that stretch of desert since that night. When I visit family in Texas, I fly. I traded in the Subaru for a newer car with better locks and a built-in GPS tracker that my brother can monitor from his phone. I changed my name on every rewards card, every account, everything that might print my information on a receipt somewhere. And sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I think about what would have happened if that minivan had not appeared when it did. If Douglas and Renee and their 2 sleepy kids had decided to take a different route home. The man said, "Another time," like it was a promise, and for a long while I expected him to keep it. But 3 years have passed, and I have never seen that old pickup truck again. Never heard that calm voice say my name through a car window. Maybe he found someone else. Maybe he is still out there on some dark road, waiting for another woman to break down in exactly the right spot. I try not to think about it too much, but I always check my rearview mirror now, and I never let my gas tank drop below half, and I will never again drive alone through the desert at night. Some lessons you only need to learn once. Everyone in my family graduated high school in 2008, cousins and all, which puts us right around 34 now. I mention that because when you hit your mid-30s, you start thinking you have life figured out. You have seen enough, experienced enough, and nothing really surprises you anymore. That confidence disappears real fast when you find yourself on a dark highway in rural New Mexico with a stranger pretending to be a cop standing at your window. I had been driving home from a work conference in Albuquerque, heading back to my apartment in Denver. The smart thing would have been to stay overnight and leave in the morning, but my cat needed her medication, and I had nobody to check on her. So there I was, Somewhere past 2 in the morning, surrounded by nothing but flat, empty desert and the occasional cactus shadow in my headlights. The highway stretched ahead like a black ribbon into nowhere, and I had not seen another car for at least 40 minutes. I was listening to some old country station, the kind that plays classics from the 70s and 80s, trying to keep myself awake with bad singing and strong gas station coffee. The speed limit was 75, and I had been doing maybe 78, nothing crazy. That is when I noticed headlights appear in my rearview mirror, coming up fast. I figured it was just someone in a hurry, maybe a trucker running late on a delivery, so I moved slightly to the right to give them room to pass. But they did not pass. The car slowed down and settled right behind me, close enough that I could tell it was some kind of sedan, gray or silver, hard to tell in the dark. Then a single blue light started flashing on their dashboard. Not a light bar on top like normal police cruisers have, just one of those magnetic dash lights you see in unmarked vehicles sometimes. My first instinct was to pull over immediately because that is what you do when you see blue lights. But something in my gut made me hesitate, made me grip the steering wheel tighter and glance at my phone sitting in the cup holder. I remember my dad telling me once that if you ever get pulled over in an isolated area and something seems wrong, you have the right to drive slowly to a well-lit public place before stopping. He was a long-haul trucker for 23 years and had seen all kinds of things on the road. So I slowed down to about 50, turned on my hazard lights to signal that I acknowledged the car behind me, and kept driving. I was hoping to see a gas station, a rest stop, anything with lights and maybe another human being. But the road ahead was nothing but darkness and the faint silhouette of distant mountains against a slightly lighter sky. The sedan stayed right on my tail, that blue light pulsing steadily. After about 2 miles of this, I heard a short burst from what sounded like a police siren, just a quick yelp, and I knew I could not keep going without making things worse. There was a wide shoulder coming up on the right, gravel and dirt, and I pulled over there with my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. The sedan pulled up behind me, maybe 15 feet back, and killed the blue light but left the headlights on, pointed directly at my mirrors. I could not see anything behind me except blinding white glare. I rolled my window down about 3 inches, just enough to talk through, and waited. It took him a long time to get out of his car, longer than any traffic stop I had ever experienced. When he finally approached, he came up fast, almost jogging, and stopped right at my window with a heavy flashlight already shining in my face. He was a big guy, over 6 feet, wearing dark pants and a black jacket with no visible patches or markings. His belt had a holster on it, and I could see the grip of a handgun, but nothing else that looked like standard police equipment. No radio, no taser, no body camera. He did not say good evening or ask for my license. The first words out of his mouth were, "You know you were driving real suspicious back there, slowing down like that." I tried to keep my voice steady and told him I was just being cautious because I was not sure if he was a real officer. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. His face changed, got tight around the jaw, and he leaned closer to my window. "You think I'm not real? You think someone would be out here at 2 in the morning pretending to be law enforcement?" He let out this short laugh that had no humor in it at all. I asked him which department he was with, and he ignored the question completely. Instead, he started shining his flashlight around the inside of my car, moving the beam across my back seat, my passenger seat, the floor mats. He lingered on my work bag, a plain black laptop case, and asked what was in it. I told him it was just my computer and some work documents. He made this sound, almost like a grunt, and said he was going to need me to step out of the vehicle for a compliance check. I asked him what a compliance check was, and he just repeated himself, slower this time, like I was stupid. Step out of the vehicle for a vehicle compliance check. Everything in my body was screaming at me to stay in the car. I had never heard of a vehicle compliance check in my life, and I grew up around cops because my uncle spent 30 years with the Denver Police Department. I told the man I would be happy to cooperate, but I wanted to see his badge first. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a wallet, flipped it open for maybe 2 seconds, then snapped it shut. In that brief flash, I saw something that looked like a badge, silver and shaped like a shield. But where the department name should have been, there was nothing but scratched metal, like someone had taken a knife or a key and scraped the letters off deliberately. That image burned into my brain. A badge with no name, no department, no jurisdiction. He tucked the wallet back into his jacket and put his hand on his hip, right next to the holster. Satisfied? Now step out. His voice had dropped lower, and there was something in his eyes that made me think of a dog right before it bites. That flat, focused stare. I told him I was not getting out of my car until he told me what department he was with and what law I had broken. He slammed his palm against my window frame so hard that I flinched back into my seat. "People who drive alone at night usually have something to hide," he said, and his voice had this strange calm to it now, like he had made some kind of decision. "Open your trunk." I said no. I said it clearly and firmly, even though my voice cracked on the word. He walked away from my window then, not back to his car, but around to the rear of mine. I watched him in my side mirror, his silhouette moving through the red glow of my taillights. He tried the trunk handle, found it locked, and I saw him crouch down to look at something near my bumper. My license plate, I realized. He was memorizing my license plate. When he stood back up, he walked slowly along the passenger side of my car, dragging his flashlight across the windows, letting the beam linger inside like he was cataloging everything he saw. He stopped at my passenger door and tried the handle. Locked. I had never been more grateful for the habit of locking all my doors the second I get in the car. He stood there for a moment, just staring at me through the glass, and in the harsh white light of his flashlight I could see his face clearly for the first time. He was maybe in his late 40s, weathered skin, a scar that ran through his left eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline. His eyes were pale, gray or light blue, and they had this emptiness to them that scared me more than anything else. Not anger, not frustration, just nothing. Like I was not a person to him, just an obstacle or maybe an opportunity. He tapped on the window with the flashlight 3 slow, deliberate knocks and said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Open the door." I reached for my phone in the cup holder, ready to call 911. And that is when I saw headlights appear on the horizon behind us, coming from the same direction I'd been traveling. The man saw them too. I watched his head turn, watched his whole body stiffen as he tracked those approaching lights. For a few seconds he did not move at all, just stood there calculating something in his head. Then, without a single word, he turned and walked back toward his sedan. Not running, not rushing, just a calm, steady walk like he was finishing up a routine traffic stop. He got into his car, and I expected him to pull out and drive away, but he just sat there with his headlights still pointed at my mirrors. The other car was getting closer now, maybe a quarter mile out, and I could tell from the height of the headlights that it was some kind of truck or SUV. I did not know if I should stay or go. Part of me wanted to floor it and get as far away as possible, but another part of me thought maybe this other driver could help, could be a witness, could at least confirm that I was not losing my mind. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, watching the approaching headlights grow brighter. The truck passed us without slowing down. It was a white pickup, older model, and I caught a glimpse of a man in a baseball cap behind the wheel. Did not even glance at us, just kept driving into the night like 2 cars on the shoulder was the most normal thing in the world. But that brief moment, those few seconds when another human being was close enough to see us, was apparently enough. The sedan behind me finally moved. It pulled out onto the highway, no turn signal, no lights at all. He drove away in complete darkness, no headlights, no taillights, nothing. I watched the shape of his car disappear into the black until I could not see it anymore. Only then did I realize I had been holding my breath. I sat there on that gravel shoulder for at least 10 minutes, just trying to get my hands to stop trembling enough to drive. When I finally pulled back onto the highway, I did 90 the rest of the way to the Colorado border and did not stop until I saw the lights of a 24-hour gas station outside Trinidad. I filed a report with the New Mexico State Police the next morning. The officer who took my call was polite but not surprised, and that scared me almost as much as the encounter itself. He told me there had been multiple reports over the past 18 months of someone conducting fake traffic stops on rural highways in the northeastern part of the state. Same description every time: gray or silver sedan, single blue dash light, a large man in plain dark clothes who refused to identify his department. Nobody had ever gotten a clear look at the license plate because he always positioned his headlights to blind the driver. Nobody had ever been able to identify the vehicle make or model with certainty. The officer asked me if the man had tried to get me out of my car, and when I said yes, there was this long pause on the line. He told me I did the right thing by staying inside and keeping my doors locked. He said not everyone had been that lucky, but he would not elaborate on what that meant. I did not push him. Part of me did not want to know. I still think about that night more often than I would like to admit. Sometimes when I am driving after dark, even on busy highways with plenty of traffic, I catch myself checking my rearview mirror every few seconds, watching for a single blue light. I never drive through New Mexico at night anymore. I take different routes now, even if they add hours to my trip, even if it means stopping overnight somewhere and paying for a motel. My uncle, the one who was a cop in Denver, told me that impersonating a police officer is a felony in every state. But these guys are almost impossible to catch because they operate in isolated areas with no witnesses and no cameras. He said some of them are thieves looking for easy targets and some of them are something worse. He did not say what worse meant, and I did not ask. All I know is that somewhere out there, on some dark stretch of highway in the desert, that man is still pulling people over. And not everyone is going to be lucky enough to have another car show up at just the right moment. I got away. I have no idea how many others did not, and that thought keeps me awake some nights, staring at the ceiling, remembering those pale, empty eyes watching me through the glass. Anyone who has driven through rural Oregon knows how fast civilization disappears once you leave the main highways. A college friend of mine had gotten married that weekend at a vineyard outside Bend, and I had made the 3-hour drive from Portland to celebrate with her. By the time the reception wound down and I said my goodbyes, the sun was already sinking behind the Cascade Range, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. I had graduated from Portland State back in 2012, spent over a decade building a career in healthcare administration, and thought I knew these roads well enough to take a shortcut. My GPS showed a 40-minute detour due to construction on the main route, but there was an alternative, a narrow county road that would shave off almost half that time. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked on the map, just a thin gray line winding through national forest land. That decision, made in the fading light of a Sunday evening, nearly cost me everything. The first few miles were unremarkable. Dense stands of Douglas fir pressed close on both sides, their branches forming a canopy that blocked what little daylight remained. I passed a single farmhouse about 2 miles in, its windows glowing warm yellow, and then nothing, just endless forest in the growing darkness. My phone lost signal almost immediately, which I expected out here, so I had downloaded the route beforehand. The road began to climb and twist, each curve revealing more of the same empty wilderness. I had the radio on low, some public station playing jazz, and I remember feeling almost hypnotized by the rhythm of the turns. Left, right, left again, the steering wheel moving smoothly through my hands. There were no other cars, no signs of life, just the hum of my engine and the occasional flash of reflective markers on the roadside. I checked the clock on my dashboard, 7:47 in the evening. According to my calculations, I had about 12 more miles before this road connected back to the highway. That is when I came around a sharp bend and saw the sedan. It was an older model, maybe a late 90s Buick or something similar, dark green with patches of rust eating through the paint near the wheel wells. The car sat diagonally across both lanes, its front bumper nearly touching the embankment on the left side of the road, its rear blocking the narrow shoulder on the right. Both front doors hung open like broken wings, and the hazard lights blinked in a slow, dying rhythm. that amber pulse barely visible, as if the battery was almost drained. My first thought was accident. Someone had lost control on the curve, maybe hit a deer and needed help. I eased off the gas and let my Subaru roll to a stop about 30 feet behind the sedan. The headlights illuminated the scene in harsh detail. Empty driver's seat, empty passenger seat, a wadded fast food bag on the dashboard. No movement, no one calling for help. Just those weak hazard lights blinking against the wall of black forest. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds, engine idling, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Something about the positioning of the car nagged at me. It was too deliberate, too perfectly placed to block the entire road. A real accident would have left skid marks, broken glass, maybe a dent in the guardrail. But the asphalt was clean, and the sedan looked undamaged except for its age. I was reaching for my phone out of habit, forgetting I had no signal, when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. On the right side of the road, maybe 15 feet into the tree line, something shifted in the underbrush. At first I thought it was an animal, a deer or a coyote disturbed by my headlights. But then I saw the glint of metal, a brief flash like light catching a belt buckle or a zipper, and below it, partially hidden behind a thick stump, a pair of boots. Work boots, the kind with steel toes planted firmly on the ground, not moving, just waiting. My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe it was just someone who had gone into the woods to relieve themselves after their car broke down. But even as that thought formed, I knew it was wrong. Nobody stands perfectly still behind a tree when a car pulls up. Nobody hides. I shifted my gaze to the left side of the road, scanning the shadows beyond the reach of my headlights. And that is when I saw the second figure. This one was crouched low behind a cluster of ferns, about 20 feet from the sedan, positioned so that anyone who got out to help would have their back to him. He was wearing something dark, a hoodie or a jacket, and I could just make out the shape of his shoulders, the angle of his head as he watched my car. Two men, hiding, waiting on opposite sides of a road that saw maybe 10 cars a day. The sedan was not broken down. The sedan was a trap. Every instinct I had screamed at me to move. I did not think about it consciously. My foot simply lifted off the brake and slammed onto the gas pedal in reverse. The Subaru lurched backward with a jolt that threw me against the steering wheel, and I heard the tires squeal against the pavement as I cranked the wheel hard to keep the car on the road. In my rear-view mirror, I saw only darkness and the faint glow of my taillights reflecting off the trees. I had no idea what was behind me, whether the road curved or dropped off or narrowed further. I was driving blind, backward, at a speed that made no sense for these conditions. And then I heard shouting, male voices, two of them, loud and angry. I glanced forward through the windshield just in time to see both figures break from the tree line and sprint toward my car. The one on the right was faster, already closing the distance with long, powerful strides. The one on the left reached into his jacket as he ran and pulled something out, something dark and angular that caught the glow of my headlights for just a fraction of a second. I did not wait to see what it was. I kept my foot on the gas and my eyes locked on the rearview mirror, trying to keep the white line on the edge of the road visible as I flew backward through the darkness. The engine roared in protest at the high RPMs, and the whole car shuddered as I hit a pothole I never saw coming. My head snapped back against the headrest, and for a terrifying moment, I felt the rear wheels slip off the pavement onto the gravel shoulder. I corrected hard, yanking the wheel to the left, and the Subaru fishtailed before finding the road again. Behind me, or ahead of me now, from their perspective, I could still hear the men shouting, their voices growing fainter but not faint enough. I risked another glance forward and saw one of them had stopped running. He stood in the middle of the road, illuminated by my headlights, and he was holding something up to his face. A phone. He was taking a picture of my license plate. The other one had not stopped. He was still coming, and he was close, maybe 40 feet away and closing fast. The road curved sharply to the right about 100 yards back. I remembered it from the drive-in, remembered the yellow warning sign with the arrow. If I hit that curve at this speed, going backward, I would go straight off the road and into the ravine. I had maybe seconds to make a decision. I could keep reversing and pray I remembered the curve correctly, or I could try to turn around. There was no room for a three-point turn, but I had seen truckers do something once on mountain roads, a sort of controlled spin where you use the momentum to whip the car around. I had never tried it. I had no idea if my Subaru could even do it, but the alternative was driving blind into a curve I could not see, with a man sprinting toward my window and another one recording my plate so they could find me later. I made my choice. I jerked the wheel hard to the left and stomped on the brake with one foot while keeping the other on the gas. The car screamed. The tires howled against the asphalt, and for one horrible, endless second, I felt the entire vehicle pivot on its axis like a carnival ride, the world spinning outside my windows in a blur of black trees and white headlight beams. The car came to a stop facing forward. I do not know how. I do not know if it was luck or physics or some deeply buried instinct that made me ease off the brake at exactly the right moment. But suddenly, I was pointed in the right direction, my headlights cutting down the road I had just reversed through, and my foot found the gas pedal before my brain even registered what had happened. The Subaru shot forward with a surge of acceleration that pushed me back into my seat. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the man who had been chasing me. He had stopped in the middle of the road, his silhouette frozen in the red glow of my taillights, watching me escape. The other one, the one with the phone, had disappeared back toward the sedan. I did not slow down. I did not look back again. I just drove, my headlights bouncing off the trees as I pushed the car faster than I should have on that narrow, winding road. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, and I realized I was making a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream, this high-pitched noise that did not even sound human. The speedometer climbed past 50, then 60, on a road that probably should not have been driven faster than 35. I have no memory of the next several miles. My body drove while my mind tried to catch up with what had just happened. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached for days afterward. I remember the taste of metal in my mouth, that copper flavor you get when adrenaline floods your system. I remember flinching at every shadow, every branch that moved in my headlights, convinced that another car would appear around every bend to cut me off. But nothing came. The road stayed empty, and eventually the trees began to thin, and I saw a glow on the horizon that meant civilization. When I finally reached the highway, I pulled into the first gas station I saw, a brightly lit Chevron with a few cars at the pumps, and a teenager in an orange vest collecting shopping carts from a little grocery store next door. I parked crookedly across two spaces, stumbled out of my car, and vomited onto the pavement. The teenager stared at me. A woman filling her tank asked if I was okay. I could not answer. I just stood there, bent over with my hands on my knees, shaking so hard I thought I might collapse. The woman at the pump ended up calling 911 for me. Her name was Jolene, and she stayed with me until the police arrived, holding my arm and telling me to breathe, just breathe. 2 deputies from the county sheriff responded within 15 minutes, and I told them everything. The sedan, the men hiding in the trees, the one who photographed my plate, the object pulled from the jacket. They exchanged a look when I described the location, a look that told me this was not the first time they had heard something like this. One of them, a stocky man with a gray mustache named Deputy Farrell, told me I was lucky. He said there had been 3 similar incidents on rural roads in that area over the past 18 months. Cars blocking the road, people flagging down drivers with fake emergencies. 2 of those drivers had stopped to help. One had been beaten, robbed, and left unconscious in a ditch. The other, a woman traveling alone like me, had never been found. Her car turned up 2 weeks later in a field outside Redmond, stripped for parts, her purse still sitting on the passenger seat. They never caught anyone. No witnesses, no cameras, no evidence except the cars left behind. I filed a report that night and gave them every detail I could remember. The green sedan, the rust spots, the work boots, the dark hoodie, the way one of them ran with long strides like an athlete. Deputy Farrell told me they would send a patrol to check the road, but when they got there an hour later, the sedan was gone. No tire marks, no footprints, nothing to prove that any of it had happened except my word and the scrapes on my rear bumper, where I had clipped something during that desperate reverse. I changed my license plate 2 days later just in case. I installed a dash cam in my car. I stopped taking shortcuts through rural areas even in daylight. For months afterward, I checked my mirrors constantly, convinced I would see that green sedan following me, those two figures waiting at the end of my driveway. That feeling has faded now, mostly, but it never fully goes away. Sometimes when I am driving at dusk and the road gets a little too empty, a little too quiet, I remember those boots behind the stump, that flash of metal in the trees, and I press the gas pedal just a little harder. I think about that other woman, the one who was never found, and I wonder what made her stop when I did not. Maybe she was braver than me. Maybe she was just unlucky. Either way, I know exactly how close I came to disappearing on that road, and I will carry that knowledge with me for the rest of my life. "14 hours into what should have been a 12-hour drive, my GPS decided to reroute me through some back roads in rural Georgia. It was a Wednesday in late September 2024, and I had been driving from my apartment in Charlotte to visit my older brother in Savannah for his 40th birthday. At 26, fresh out of a dead-end relationship and grinding through my second year as a paralegal at a small law firm, I figured the solo road trip would clear my head. The highway had been smooth until a major accident near Macon forced everyone onto detours, and somehow I ended up on a 2-lane road cutting through pine forests and farmland I had never seen before. My phone signal had dropped to 1 bar, the sun was sinking fast behind the tree line, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I had not passed another car in almost 20 minutes. The isolation should have bothered me more than it did, but I was too tired to care. Too focused on just getting to my destination before midnight. I felt the steering wheel jerk to the right before I heard the sound, that unmistakable flapping of rubber against pavement that every driver dreads. My front passenger tire had blown, and I pulled onto a narrow shoulder that was barely wide enough for my Ford Escape. When I stepped out to assess the damage, the silence hit me first. No birds, no distant highway noise, nothing but the wind moving through the pines and the ticking of my cooling engine. The tire was completely shredded, and I realized with a sinking feeling that my spare was one of those tiny temporary ones that I had never actually learned to install. I pulled out my phone to call roadside assistance through my insurance, but the signal kept flickering between 1 bar and nothing. I was standing there, trying to hold my phone at different angles like that would somehow help, when I saw headlights appear around the bend behind me. A tow truck, moving slow, its yellow roof lights cutting through the growing dusk like it had been waiting for me. The truck pulled up behind my car and a man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with a wiry build and arms that seemed too long for his body. He wore a gray work shirt with no visible name patch, and his face was weathered in a way that made it hard to guess his age, anywhere between 40 and 60. His hair was cropped short, almost military style, and he had this way of tilting his head slightly when he looked at me, like a dog trying to figure out a strange noise. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, almost too calm, like he had rehearsed this exact moment. He asked if I needed help, said he had seen my hazard lights from a mile back. I thanked him but told him I was calling my insurance for roadside assistance. He nodded slowly, then said something that made the hair on my arm stand up. He said all the local shops were closed for the night, and that my best bet was to let him tow me to a private lot about 15 miles down the road where I could wait safely until morning. I told him I appreciated the offer, but that I would rather wait for my insurance company to send someone. He did not move, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, studying me with that tilted head. The smile faded, and he said waiting out here was not a good idea, that this stretch of road got dangerous after dark. I asked him what he meant by dangerous, and he just shrugged and said there had been incidents, people getting hurt, cars getting stolen. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell cigarette smoke and something else, something metallic on his clothes. He said he was just trying to help, that I was a young woman alone on an empty road, and that not everyone out here had good intentions. The way he said it, slow and deliberate, felt less like a warning and more like a threat wrapped in concern. I told him again that I was fine, that help was on the way, even though I still had not been able to get a call through. He stared at me for a long moment, then walked back to his truck and leaned against the driver door, arms crossed, watching. I got back into my car and locked the doors. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I kept glancing at my rearview mirror where I could see his silhouette against the fading sky. I tried my phone again, and this time it connected for just long enough to reach my brother. The call was breaking up badly, but I managed to tell him where I thought I was, somewhere off Route 221, near a town called Pemberton, or Pemberton County. I was not sure. He said he would call the sheriff and send help, told me to stay in the car with the doors locked, and then the call dropped. Those few seconds of connection felt like a lifeline being thrown to me across a dark ocean. I sat there gripping my phone, watching the battery drain to 37%, and tried to slow my breathing. The tow truck driver had not moved. He just stood there, a dark shape against his truck, and I could feel his eyes on me even through the growing darkness. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20, and he did not leave. Then he started walking toward my car again. This time his posture was different, less casual, more purposeful, like he had made some kind of decision. He knocked on my window and I cracked it maybe an inch, just enough to hear him. His voice had changed too, lost that fake friendliness from before. He said I was making a mistake, that my phone was not going to work out here, that nobody was coming for me. He said he had been doing this a long time, and he knew how these situations ended. I asked him what exactly he had been doing a long time, and he paused, like he realized he had said too much. He recovered quickly, said he meant towing cars, helping stranded drivers, but there was a flicker in his expression that told me he was lying. I told him to leave me alone or I would call the police. He laughed at that, a dry sound with no humor in it, and said, "Go ahead, try." He pointed out that my phone had no signal, that I was miles from anywhere, and that the nearest police station was in Crawford County, a 40-minute drive even if they left right now. He knew the area too well, recited those details too easily, and that terrified me more than anything else he had said. I decided to do something that felt insane, but also felt like my only option. I rolled up my window, put my car in drive, and started moving forward on the shredded tire. The sound was awful, metal grinding against asphalt, the rims sparking in my side mirror. But I did not care. I would rather destroy my car than stay there with him. He stood in the road for a second and I thought he might try to block me. But then he jogged back to his truck. In my rearview mirror, I saw him climb in and follow me, keeping a steady distance of maybe 50 feet. He did not try to pass me or run me off the road, just followed, his headlights filling my car with harsh white light. I drove like that for what felt like forever, but was probably only 3 or 4 miles, my rim throwing sparks, my steering wheel vibrating so hard my arms ached. I kept looking for any sign of civilization, a house, a gas station, another car, but there was nothing. Just trees and darkness and that tow truck behind me like a predator trailing wounded prey. Then I saw lights ahead. Not headlights, but the blue and red flash of a police cruiser. I have never felt relief like that in my entire life. This wave of emotion so strong that tears started running down my face before I even realized I was crying. A Crawford County Sheriff's deputy had been dispatched after my brother called, and he'd been driving up and down Route 221 trying to find me. I pulled over and practically fell out of my car, waving my arms, and the deputy got out with his hand on his holster. Behind me, the tow truck had stopped about 100 yards back. For a moment it just sat there, engine running, and I pointed at it, trying to explain through my gasping breaths that the driver had been following me, pressuring me, refusing to leave. The deputy shined his flashlight toward the truck, and I saw something I will never forget. The driver making a slow, deliberate U-turn and driving away. No rush, no panic, just calm and methodical, like this was not the first time he had been interrupted. The deputy, a guy named Weston with a thick Georgia accent and kind eyes, sat me down in his cruiser and let me catch my breath. He handed me a bottle of water and asked me to describe everything that had happened, which I did, stumbling over my words but getting the important parts out. When I mentioned the name on the side of the tow truck, I had noticed it earlier, but my brain had been too panicked to process it. He frowned and asked me to repeat it. I told him it said something like reliable roadside or reliable recovery, but now that I thought about it, the lettering had looked wrong, uneven, like it had been applied recently and maybe not professionally. Weston typed something into his computer, waited, then looked at me with an expression that made my stomach tighten. He said there was no registered towing company by that name in Crawford County or any of the surrounding counties. He asked if I had noticed the license plate on the truck, and I had. Georgia plates, I was pretty sure, starting with the letters BKV. He typed that in too, and after a long pause, he told me the plate did not match any registered tow truck in the state database. Weston called for backup and stayed with me while we waited. Another deputy arrived about 20 minutes later, and they arranged for a legitimate tow truck to come get my car from a company in the next town over. While we waited, Weston told me some things that kept me awake for weeks afterward. He said this stretch of Route 221 had been flagged internally for unusual activity over the past 18 months. Cars reported stolen after breakdowns, a couple of drivers who had gone missing for hours before turning up disoriented and unable to explain where they had been. One woman had her car towed to what she was told was a repair shop, but when police investigated, the address did not exist. They found her vehicle 3 weeks later, stripped for parts, in a barn about 60 miles away. No arrests had been made because nobody could identify the people involved. The descriptions were always vague: average height, average build, forgettable face. But the man I had encountered was not forgettable at all, and when I described him in detail, Weston wrote down every word like it might actually help them catch whoever was doing this. My brother drove up from Savannah to meet me at the Crawford County Sheriff's Station, and I have never hugged anyone so hard in my life. He took one look at me. Mascara streaked down my face, still shaking, clutching a styrofoam cup of cold coffee, and did not say a word, just wrapped his arms around me and let me fall apart. The deputies took a formal statement, showed me some photographs of known vehicle theft suspects in the region, but none of them matched the man I had seen. They told me they would be in touch if anything developed, gave me a case number and a victim's advocate card, and sent me on my way. My brother drove us both to Savannah that night in his truck, while my ruined Ford sat in an impound lot waiting to be assessed. I did not sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that tow truck's headlights in my rearview mirror, steady and patient, and I heard his voice telling me that nobody was coming. I kept thinking about what would have happened if my brother had not answered his phone, if the deputy had been 5 minutes later, if I had made the mistake of trusting that man and letting him tow my car to whatever private lot he had in mind. It has been 2 months since that night, and I still do not have closure. The sheriff's office contacted me once, about 3 weeks after, to tell me they had identified the tow truck. It had been reported stolen from a legitimate company in Augusta almost a year earlier, repainted and fitted with magnetic panels to change its appearance. The plates were stolen too, from a pickup in Valdosta. They never found the driver. They never identified him from my description, or if they did, they never told me. I traded in what was left of my Ford for something new, something with better roadside assistance coverage, and I downloaded 3 different emergency apps that can send my location even without cell signal. I do not drive alone at night anymore, not on highways, and definitely not on back roads. Sometimes I wonder if he is still out there, cruising those empty stretches of Route 221, waiting for someone else's tire to blow or engine to stall. And sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I wonder about those other drivers Weston mentioned. The ones who went missing for hours and came back disoriented, unable to remember what happened. I got lucky. I know that now. But I cannot stop thinking about the ones who were not lucky at all, and what exactly that man had planned for me if I had made the mistake of saying yes. A long drive with my friend Mark had seemed like the clean break I needed that year. I'd just left a job that had drained me to the bone, and he was moving across the country for a new position, so I offered to ride along and help with the haul. By the time we reached that rural rest area, the kind of place that felt forgotten by most maps, our conversations had thinned into tired rambling. The air outside carried this strange stillness, like everything was holding its breath. A single SUV sat a few spaces down, engine humming softly. Inside it, a guy leaned toward the woman in the passenger seat, speaking low, his jaw moving with this sharp precision that felt confrontational even from a distance. The woman didn't react at all. She stared straight ahead, eyes wide, the kind of stiffness that made her look carved out of wax. Mark muttered something about needing to pee before he passed out, so we headed toward the building. The restroom lights flickered with that sickly yellow tint that shows every crack in the tiles. I remember washing my hands and feeling this weird pressure in my chest, a sense that something was happening outside while we weren't looking. When we walked back out, the night felt slightly different, like it had shifted a few degrees somehow. The SUV wasn't where we'd left it. It had rolled forward and angled itself right across the exit lane, like it was waiting for us. The woman inside had turned her head toward us now, and the expression on her face didn't match the stillness from before. It had this frozen, terrified quality, like she wanted to scream but couldn't make a sound. As we approached my car, the guy in the SUV didn't even glance our way. He was talking on speakerphone, his voice suddenly casual, almost cheerful. The words didn't fit the moment. "Yeah, we'll keep things quiet. No one needs to know anything yet." His tone had that unsettling confidence some people get when they believe they're in complete control of a situation. Mark shot me a look, the kind where concern fills in the blanks without either of us needing to say anything. The woman's eyes tracked us, and I swear there was a pleading glint there, something desperate trying to reach out past the glass. I felt my throat tighten because I didn't know whether to help, run, or pretend none of it was happening. We left quickly, driving in silence for a good 30 minutes before either of us could piece together words. The plan had been to push through until dawn, but neither of us had the energy, so we pulled into a roadside motel that looked worn but open, the kind with a buzzing vacancy sign and a parking lot lit by tired floodlights. While Mark checked us in, I glanced around the lot, trying to shake the lingering tension from the rest area. For a moment, it worked, until a familiar shape rolled quietly past the road and into the lot. The same SUV, lights off, slow enough that it barely seemed to move. My chest tightened again, and every instinct screamed that this wasn't coincidence. The vehicle settled near the far corner as if trying not to draw attention, though the darkness surrounding it made the intention obvious. Something was following us, and we still didn't understand why. We got to our room and locked the door immediately, both of us pretending not to be as rattled as we were. The place had that typical roadside layout, 2 thin rooms sharing one flimsy wall that you could probably punch through if you were angry enough. Mark tried to play it cool, flipping through channels like noise alone could anchor us back to normal. I remember standing near the window, staring at the parking lot through the slit of the curtain. The SUV was still there, engine off, no movement inside. Just a dark outline waiting in the corner like it belonged to the shadows. I kept thinking about the woman's face from earlier, the way her eyes had locked onto mine, wide and silent, begging without a voice. That image clung to me harder than anything the man had said. Sometime after midnight, the tapping started. Soft at first, so quiet I thought it was just the building settling or maybe a tree brushing against the siding. But it came again. 3 light taps, spaced evenly, almost intentional. Mark muted the TV immediately. We both stared at the wall between our room and the next, the one that felt too thin to be a barrier against anything serious. The tapping repeated, a little firmer, like someone testing how much pressure they could use before drawing attention. I whispered Mark's name, but he didn't answer. He just walked toward the wall with that cautious, slow step, like he expected it to move or crack open. Then came a sound that didn't fit tapping at all. A muffled shuffle, something dragging softly against the carpeted floor just on the other side. We didn't want to call the front desk at first. It felt dramatic, like maybe we were overreacting to a long day and too little sleep. But then a new sound cut through any doubt, a low, strained exhale, the kind someone makes when they're forcing themselves to stay quiet. That was enough to send Mark reaching for his phone. While he dialed, I stepped back from the wall, feeling this weird sense that someone was mirroring my movements just inches away. Dispatch said they'd send a patrol, and while Mark explained the situation, I kept watching the window, half expecting to see the SUV pull right up to our door. Instead, the parking lot stayed still, unnervingly still, as if the whole world had paused while something in the next room tried not to be heard. 10 minutes later, someone knocked on our door, but it wasn't law enforcement. It was softer, slower, the same rhythm as the tapping earlier. Mark and I didn't move. We just stared at each other, stuck in that moment where you're afraid even to breathe too loudly. Whoever was outside didn't knock again. Instead, footsteps moved past our door and down the walkway, stopping somewhere near the far end of the building. We heard a door open, just a small creak, and then everything went silent again. A few minutes later, the patrol car finally arrived, lights flashing faintly against our curtains. Relief washed over me, but only for a second because I suddenly realized I had no idea who or what the officers were about to find on the other side of that wall. The officers knocked on the room next to ours, announcing themselves. No answer. They knocked again, louder this time, and the whole mood of the night shifted. You could hear it in the air, the tension, the expectation. One officer tried the handle and the door pushed open without resistance. Mark and I stepped closer, watching from our doorway even though we knew we shouldn't. The room was empty, completely empty. Bed untouched, lights off, no luggage, no signs anyone had settled in at all. What got me wasn't the emptiness. It was the lingering scent of cheap cologne mixed with something metallic, something sharp, like someone had just left in a hurry. The officers exchanged a quick look, the kind that says we're not writing this off as nothing. They did a sweep of the walkway, checking doors and corners, but whoever had been in there, or whatever, was gone without a trace. When they came to talk to us, the desk clerk appeared too, stepping quietly into the hallway. He was an older guy with a nervous habit of rubbing his thumb across the side of his palm. He listened as we explained the SUV, the tapping, everything. The moment Mark described the man at the rest area talking on speakerphone, the clerk's whole posture stiffened. He lowered his voice and said something that made every hair on my body lift. If it's the same man I think it is, he's stayed here before. Never under the same name. Always checks in late, always with a woman, and she never speaks. Not once. His eyes shifted toward the officers like he regretted saying it out loud. The officers didn't dismiss him. They wrote everything down, including the SUV's description, though part of me could tell they already sensed how slippery this situation might be. Eventually, the patrol car left to scan the nearby roads, and the clerk insisted we move to a room near the front desk for the rest of the night. He handed us a new key card with this slow, deliberate caution, like he was afraid the man might appear behind us at any second. Mark grabbed our bags and we followed the clerk down the walkway, glancing over the railing toward the parking lot every few steps. The SUV was gone. No engine hum, no lights, no silhouette lurking in the dark corner where it had been earlier. The space where it sat looked wrong in a way I can't explain, like the asphalt itself felt relieved to be rid of it. We tried to sleep, but every sound, pipes ticking, cars passing on the highway, the thud of someone closing their door, kept pulling us back into that night's dread. I kept imagining that woman, the way she looked at us, like she had one last chance to reach someone before disappearing for good. By morning, the officers still hadn't located the SUV or anything matching the clerk's past encounters. We checked out quickly, thanking the clerk, who just nodded like this sort of thing haunted him more often than he wanted to admit. As we drove away, sunlight cut through the lingering fog, making everything look harmless again. But I couldn't shake the picture in my mind. That woman in the passenger seat, eyes locked onto mine, silently begging for something I couldn't give. Mark and I barely spoke for the next few hours, and when we finally did, neither of us tried to make sense of what happened. Whatever that man was involved in, whoever that woman was, they vanished as quickly as they appeared. The only concrete resolution we ever got was knowing we'd left that motel alive, and that sometimes the scariest things aren't supernatural at all. They're just people moving quietly through the cracks of the world, hoping no one notices. Hard to explain my life at the time without sounding scattered, but I'd been doing contract work all over the region in early 2024, driving from one small town to another because it paid better than sticking to one city. That week I was heading north after a job that ran long, running on gas station coffee, and a playlist I'd already heard way too many times. Mid-afternoon, somewhere between towns I'd never heard of, my front right tire started giving this uneven wobble, like the whole wheel was shifting its weight every few seconds. I pulled over, checked it, didn't see anything obvious, but the sound unnerved me enough that I didn't want to risk another 50 miles on it. A weather-faded sign pointed toward a town I swear wasn't on my GPS the day before, so I turned in hoping to find a mechanic. The place barely counted as a town, 3 blocks, maybe 4, with more empty windows than open businesses. The only sign of life was a convenience store with a crooked "open" sign buzzing in its window. Behind it sat a garage that looked like someone had tried to renovate it 30 years ago and then just stopped. A single metal bay door was half open, and inside stood a tall guy in a stained gray coverall, sleeves tied around his waist. His name patch had peeled away, leaving only the outline. He had coarse salt and pepper hair tied back with a red elastic band, and the kind of stare that never seemed to blink at the right time. When I explained the tire issue, he nodded slowly and said he needed to bring the car into the closed bay for safety, then gave this odd cough laugh as if he'd said something funny only he understood. I tried insisting that I could just wait outside, but he shook his head and pointed me toward a door beside the garage marked "Customers." The latch was removed, just a smooth metal plate where one should have been. He opened it with a key from his pocket and told me it would only take a little while. The room inside felt wrong the moment I stepped in. Not dangerous, just trapped. The windows were boarded from the inside with mismatched planks, some nailed in diagonals like someone was trying to keep things out, or in. The only furniture was a sagging couch and a vending machine stocked with snacks that expired months ago. When he shut the door, I heard the click of a lock even though there was no latch on my side. That was the first moment a faint tremor of worry started crawling up my spine. Minutes dragged into an hour, then 2 with no sound of tools, no voices, no movement from the garage. I tried knocking on the door, then pressing my ear against it, but all I could hear was a low hum from the vending machine and the whistle of wind sneaking through the boards. By the 3rd hour, I couldn't sit still anymore. I started searching the walls and found a small storage door tucked behind the vending machine, the bottom corner warped as if someone had kicked it once and lost. Bracing all my weight, I pushed until the wood groaned and snapped inward. The gap led to a narrow storage corridor, dimly lit by a single bulb dangling from a frayed cord. At the end of it, a doorway opened into the back of the garage, and that's when I saw my car, parked exactly where I'd left it, completely untouched. Next to it were plastic bins stacked in neat columns, each filled with items that didn't belong together: backpacks, jackets, travel toiletries, even a baby's shoe. All of it arranged like someone was collecting pieces of people who never came back. Up close, the bins were even worse. One was filled with loose chargers and phones with cracked screens. another with random pieces of luggage tags and keychains, and a third had a mix of sunglasses, half-used travel-size shampoo bottles, and a single license plate bent like someone had tried to fold it in half. There were no labels, no attempt to sort by owner, just piles of life fragments stripped of context. I recognized the brand of a travel mug I'd seen in truck stops 100 times, and for a second, I pictured people I didn't know standing at gas stations, holding those same mugs, on trips they probably never finished. The air smelled like old oil and something faintly metallic, like blood that had been cleaned up weeks ago but never fully left. My own car sitting there untouched made everything worse. Whatever this guy was doing, it didn't involve repairs. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my footsteps quiet on the concrete. That dangling bulb above me swayed slightly, even though the air felt still, making the shadows jump across the bins like they were breathing. From somewhere in the garage, beyond my line of sight, I heard a faint scraping sound like metal dragging briefly across the floor and then stopping. Instinct made me reach for my keys, and I realized they weren't in my pocket. They were with the mechanic. My backpack wasn't with me either. I'd left it in the car. That detail hit harder than I expected. I suddenly understood how easy it would be for someone to strip away a person's identity out here. Take their car, their bag, their phone, and they'd become nothing but an entry on a missing persons list months later, if that. The corridor branched to the left, away from the open area, toward what looked like a side door with a small wired glass window. I moved toward it, counting each step just to give my brain something to hold on to. The window had been painted over from the inside, but at the edges the paint had chipped enough for thin streaks of daylight to leak through. I pressed my ear against the metal door and heard distant traffic, the faint roar of cars passing at highway speed. That sound snapped a decision into place. If I could get out that door, I didn't care about the car anymore. I could get help, or at least distance. The knob resisted at first, but when I leaned my shoulder into it, the old metal frame shuddered, and the latch gave just enough that I could slip through into the harsh, late afternoon light. Behind the building, weeds grew up through cracked asphalt, and the back lot stretched out to a scrubby patch of grass that ended near the highway embankment. No other cars were parked back there. No tow trucks, no sign of anyone else. The main road through the town wrapped around the front, but from where I stood, the street felt miles away. My pulse hammered in my ears as I cut through the weeds, ducking low in case the mechanic stepped outside. I didn't run at first. I walked as quickly as I could without drawing attention, trying not to trip over a half-buried muffler or the skeleton of an old tire. When I reached the edge of the embankment and saw the highway below, the sound of rushing cars felt like proof that the world still existed outside this decaying pocket of nowhere. That's when I finally broke into a run, sliding down the dirt slope and stumbling onto the shoulder, sticking my arm out in a desperate attempt to flag someone down. A delivery van was the first vehicle to slow down enough to notice me. The driver, a middle-aged guy with a mesh cap and a sunburned neck, rolled down his window and stared like he was trying to figure out if I was drunk or hurt. I must have looked wild, dust on my clothes, sweat streaking down my face, breathing like I'd sprinted a mile. I told him I needed to get to the next real town, anywhere with a police station. He didn't ask many questions, just jerked his chin toward the passenger seat and said he was heading east. As we pulled away, I glanced back up the embankment, half expecting to see the mechanic standing there watching. Nothing moved. The place looked empty again, like a set someone forgot to tear down after filming. At the police station, the officer on duty listened carefully, but kept giving me this cautious look, like he was trying to sort out whether I was exaggerating or if something genuinely criminal had happened. When I mentioned the bins of other people's belongings, he leaned forward slightly. That was the first sign that he took any of this seriously. He asked for the exact location, but when I tried pulling it up on my phone, the GPS marker bounced around and wouldn't lock onto anything. The officer eventually radioed for someone to check the area while he took my statement, though he warned me that abandoned towns sometimes got used for storage or salvage work. He said it in a way that suggested he didn't fully believe that explanation himself. By nightfall, Another officer stepped into the room and quietly told the one interviewing me that the garage was locked up, lights off, and looked recently vacated. No sign of the mechanic, no boarded windows, no bins, nothing resembling what I'd described. They did, however, find fresh tire tracks in the dirt behind the building, leading toward the main road. I asked if they'd found my car, and both officers exchanged a glance that told me something wasn't right. One of them cleared his throat and said a vehicle matching my description had been located, 2 counties away, in an impound lot. No damage reported, no ticket, no note, no explanation for how it got there or who dropped it off. The impound attendant claimed it had been left in the middle of the night without paperwork. When they finally released me the next morning to pick up the car, I went straight to the lot. Seeing it parked neatly between 2 other vehicles made my skin prickle in a way I still can't articulate. Nothing was missing inside, not even the backpack I'd stupidly left behind. The keys were on the front seat, placed perfectly parallel like someone wanted them to be noticed. I asked the attendant if cameras had picked up anything the night before, but he shook his head. System had been down for days due to a power issue. I drove away feeling like I'd slipped out of a situation that was meant to go very differently, though I still don't know what the mechanic wanted or why he collected those items. All I know is that I take any wobble in my tires seriously now, and I never stop in towns that don't appear on the map.